Maria Thompson had always believed that kindness could change the world. She wasn't a person who looked for drama or attention. She was soft-spoken, but strong when she needed to be. People often said she had a way of making others feel safe, just by being near them. Maria grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a slower pace. It was the kind of place where neighbors brought food when someone was sick, and kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Her parents ran a small grocery store in the heart of town, and Maria spent most of her childhood there, helping behind the counter and learning the value of hard work. Her mother was gentle and wise, always reminding Maria to treat people with respect no matter what. Her father was strict but fair, teaching her how to stand up for herself without losing her cool. Together they raised her to believe that education was power and that speaking up for what's right was never a mistake. Maria went to college on a scholarship and became a school teacher. She loved working with children, especially those who struggled in class or felt left out. She made it her mission to make every student feel seen and valued. In her classroom there were no favorites, only young minds full of potential. She stayed in the town after college, choosing to give back rather than chase big city dreams. That's just who she was. It was during one of her school events that she met David Thompson. He was the new sheriff at the time, tall and quiet, with a calm presence that made people feel at ease. He had grown up in the same town but had spent years working in bigger cities before returning home to serve. At first, Maria didn't think much of him. He seemed like just another officer trying to make a name for himself. But over time, she saw something different in him: honesty, patience, and a deep desire to do good. They started talking more, then dating, and eventually got married. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. They both wanted to help their community grow into something better. While David worked long hours keeping peace in the town, Maria continued teaching and also began volunteering with local youth programs. She helped organize after-school tutoring sessions and even led workshops on self-esteem and communication skills for teenagers. People admired them. Some said they were the perfect team. David as the lawman trying to clean up the system from the inside, and Maria as the educator planting seeds of hope in the next generation. Others were less kind. A few whispered about their marriage, not because they knew either of them personally, but because Maria was black and David was white. In a town that had come a long way, some old attitudes still lingered in corners where light rarely reached, but Maria never let the hate define her. She kept doing what she did best, helping people, building trust, and quietly showing love in action. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Still, she knew that the color of her skin would always make her an easy target for certain kinds of people. She had learned that lesson early in life, and though she tried not to dwell on it, she made sure to teach her students and remind herself that dignity was a choice, not a gift. One summer afternoon, Maria decided to run a few errands alone while David was busy with a training session for his officers. She had a list in her hand: pick up groceries, drop off a donation at the community center, and stop by the library to return some books. Nothing unusual. She drove through the familiar streets, smiling at the kids playing in driveways and waving at folks sitting on porches. She was almost done when she noticed flashing lights behind her. She checked her mirrors and pulled over carefully, wondering what she had done wrong. She had been driving the speed limit, signaling properly, and obeying all traffic signs. Still, the car behind her was official, blue and white, with the badge shining under the sun. A man stepped out of the driver's seat. He was tall, with a stern look on his face and a heavy belt loaded with tools of authority. Maria rolled down her window and smiled politely. "Good afternoon, officer," she said. He didn't smile back. Instead, he looked at her like she had done something wrong just by being there. "License and registration," he said flatly. Maria nodded and reached for her bag. "Sure thing. Just a second." As she searched, the officer leaned closer to the open window. His eyes scanned her car, her clothes, her face. "You live around here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Yes, sir. Just off Maple Street," she replied calmly. He snorted. "You sure about that?" Maria paused. There was something in his voice that made her uneasy, It wasn't just roughness, it was disrespect. "I've lived here over 10 years," she said gently. "I'm a teacher at the high school." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Yeah? Well, that don't mean much these days." Maria took a breath. She had heard this kind of talk before, usually from people who judged without knowing. But this was different. This was a cop, someone sworn to protect her. She handed him her license and registration. He looked at the documents, then at her, then back again. "You drive suspicious," he said suddenly. Maria blinked. "Excuse me? You heard me," he said, louder now. "Driving slow, looking around too much, you hiding something?" "No, officer," Maria said, keeping her voice steady. "I was just trying to stay aware of my surroundings. I didn't realize that was against the law." His jaw tightened. "Don't get smart with me." There was silence for a moment. Then he reached for his radio and called in her information. Maria sat quietly, heart beginning to beat faster. She wasn't scared, at least not yet. But she knew this conversation was going in the wrong direction. After a few minutes, the officer returned to her window. His eyes were cold. "You got 5 seconds to get out of the car," he said. Maria's eyes widened. "Sir, I don't understand. What is this about?" "You heard me," he said. "Out. Now." And then slowly he reached for his gun. Maria's breath caught in her throat. The officer had his hand on his gun, and his eyes were locked on hers like he was waiting for her to do something wrong. She could feel the heat of the sun through the open window. But the chill inside her car was stronger. Her heart pounded not from fear alone, but from disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not in the town she had called home for over a decade. "Sir?" she said slowly, trying to keep her voice calm. "I don't know what this is about, but I'm not going anywhere until you explain why I'm being treated like this." The officer's jaw tightened. He didn't blink. Instead, he pulled out his gun fully and pointed it straight at her chest. "Out. Now." His voice was cold and loud enough for people nearby to hear. A few cars had stopped down the road, their drivers watching with confusion and concern. One man stepped out of his truck, phone already in hand. Another woman quickly pulled her child inside their car and drove off. Maria looked into the officer's eyes and saw something worse than anger. She saw hate. It wasn't just dislike. It was the kind of hatred that made people forget the rules they were supposed to follow. She knew if she made the wrong move, things could get even worse. So she did what she always did in tough moments. She stayed calm and tried to talk. "Officer Jenkins," she said, reading his name tag. "My name is Maria Thompson. I teach history at the high school. I volunteer at the community center. I've never broken a law in my life." He didn't lower his weapon. If anything, he held it tighter. "I don't care who you think you are," he said. "You're not above the law." Maria took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She thought of her students, of the parents who trusted her with their kids, of David, the sheriff, who would be shocked if he knew what was happening to her right now. And then, she decided it was time to remind this officer who she really was. "My husband is Sheriff Thompson," she said clearly, looking him in the eye. "If you hurt me, touched me, or shoot me, you won't just be dealing with the department. You'll be dealing with the entire country." For the first time, the officer blinked. A flicker of doubt crossed his face like he hadn't expected that answer, but he still didn't put the gun away. "You expect me to believe that?" he asked, though his voice had lost some of its edge. Maria didn't flinch. She reached slowly into her bag and pulled out her phone. With steady fingers, she opened her messages and showed him a text from David. "Hey love, I'll be home late. Got stuck in a meeting. Love you." Jenkins stared at the screen. Then he looked at her again, and for the first time he seemed unsure. Maria kept going. "You can call him yourself if you want, or you can call the station. Either way, this moment will define your career. Are you ready to explain to the sheriff why you pulled a gun on his wife?" Silence filled the space between them. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the buzz of insects in the summer heat. Then slowly, Jenkins lowered his gun. His face was red now, not with anger, but embarrassment. I didn't know, he muttered. No, Maria said gently. You didn't. And that's exactly the problem. She didn't gloat. She didn't yell. She simply sat there proud and strong, watching as the officer backed away slightly, unsure of what to do next. After a long pause, Jenkins turned toward his car and radioed in. His voice was quieter now, less aggressive. Maria couldn't make out everything he said, but she knew the message was clear. He had made a mistake. Within minutes, another patrol car arrived. It was Deputy Ramirez, a young officer Maria had met during a school event earlier that year. When he saw her sitting calmly in her car and Jenkins pacing nearby, his eyes widened. Mrs. Thompson? He asked, confused. Maria smiled. Hello, Deputy. I think your partner needs to speak with someone. Ramirez nodded slowly, then looked at Jenkins. There was no need for more explanation. He understood. Later, after Jenkins was taken back to the station for questioning, Maria sat with Ramirez for a few minutes. She thanked him for coming and told him not to blame himself for what happened. It's not your fault, she said, but it's all of our jobs to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. When she finally got home, David was already there, waiting anxiously by the door. As soon as he saw her, he rushed forward and pulled her into a tight hug. You okay? He asked, his voice shaking. Maria nodded. I am, but we have a lot to talk about. That night they sat together in silence for a long time, holding hands and thinking. They both knew this wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about a system that allowed fear and bias to grow unchecked. The next morning, Maria woke up early. She made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sun rise over the rooftops of the town she loved. She thought about the children she taught, the lives she touched, and the changes that still needed to happen. She also thought about the video that had started spreading online. A clip of her being threatened by a man, sworn to protect her. It was painful to watch, but she knew it was important. People needed to see the truth. By noon, the video had gone viral. Local news picked it up. Then national outlets followed. Within hours, people across the country were talking about what happened to Maria Thompson. Some were angry, some were heartbroken, others were inspired. And Maria, she was ready to turn pain into purpose. The days that followed were some of the hardest Maria had ever faced. The video of what happened with Officer Jenkins spread like wildfire. It was on every news channel, every social media feed. People were shocked, angry, and heartbroken all at once. Some said she was brave beyond words. Others tried to twist the story, asking why she didn't just do what he said, or suggesting she must have done something to provoke him. But Maria stayed strong. She didn't want pity. She wanted change. David stood by her side through it all. He held a press conference the day after the video went viral. His voice was calm but firm as he addressed the town and the world watching. This is not who we are, he said. This is not what our badge stands for. He announced that Jenkins had been suspended pending an internal investigation. But Maria knew that wasn't enough. Firing one bad officer wouldn't fix everything. There were deeper problems in the department, problems that had been ignored for too long. She started getting messages from people all over the country. Some were strangers sharing their own painful stories. Others were mothers writing about how scared they were for their sons and daughters whenever they saw a police car. A young girl from another state sent her a drawing of Maria standing tall, holding a sign that read, "We deserve respect." Maria cried when she saw it, not because she felt sorry for herself, but because she realized how much power this moment had. Her pain had become a mirror for so many others. Still, not everyone supported her. In her own town, some people turned cold. At the grocery store, a few neighbors avoided eye contact. One man even told her to her face that she should let it go and stop making a big deal out of nothing. It's just one officer, he said. But Maria knew better. One officer might have pointed the gun, but the silence around racism in The department allowed it to happen. Inside the sheriff's office, things were tense. Some officers respected David more than ever for taking a stand. Others whispered behind closed doors, upset that the department was now under national spotlight. Maria could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her husband. One night, after another long day of interviews and meetings, David sat beside her on the couch. He looked tired. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "But I know this isn't easy." Maria smiled softly. "It's never been easy, but it's necessary." They both knew the road ahead would be long. Jenkins' case would take time. The investigation would dig into his past records, his training, his behavior during other stops. Maria would have to testify, answer questions, and relive that terrible moment again and again. But she was ready. A week later, Maria was invited to speak at a community meeting. The town hall was packed. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds came to listen. Some were curious. Some were hurt. Others were hopeful. When Maria stepped up to the microphone, she took a deep breath. "I didn't ask for this moment," she began. "I was just driving home after helping my students and volunteering at the center. I didn't break any laws. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked for respect, and I was met with fear, bias, and a weapon." The room was silent. "But I don't want this to be just my story," she continued. "I want it to be a chance for us to grow, for us to look at ourselves and ask, are we doing enough? Are we protecting everyone equally? Or are we letting old fears and false ideas decide who deserves safety?" Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't waver. She spoke not with anger, but with purpose. Afterward, people came up to thank her. A young black boy hugged her leg and whispered, "You're really brave." An older white woman gave her a hug and said, "Thank you for saying what needed to be said." That night, Maria lay awake thinking. She thought about her parents who had raised her to believe in kindness. She thought about her students who looked up to her. And she thought about the future, the kind of town she wanted to leave behind. Over the next few weeks, changes began to take shape. The sheriff's office announced new training programs focused on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. They brought in experts from outside the town to lead workshops. Maria was asked to help design part of the curriculum. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was real. And slowly, the community started talking, really talking, about race, justice, and fairness. Maria kept teaching. She kept showing up for her students, giving them the same love and support as always. But now she also carried a new role. Not just a teacher, not just the sheriff's wife, but a voice for those who had been silenced for too long. She knew the struggle wasn't over. That one officer being held accountable was only the beginning. But she also knew that courage has a way of spreading, and if her story could inspire even one person to stand up for what's right, then every hard moment had been worth it. Because Maria Thompson believed in something bigger than herself. She believed that truth, when spoken clearly and honestly, could change hearts, and she was just getting started. The investigation into Officer Jenkins moved quickly once the video spread across the country. The internal affairs team from the state police came in to take over the case, making sure everything was handled fairly and without bias. Maria gave her full statement, describing every word that was said, every action that was taken, and how she had felt during those terrifying moments. She didn't try to exaggerate anything. She told the truth clearly and calmly, just like she always did. Inside the sheriff's office, things were changing. David had promised his town that he would lead with honesty and fairness, and now he was being tested more than ever. He asked for open meetings between officers and community members, giving people a chance to speak their minds without fear. Some shared painful stories about past experiences with law enforcement. Others offered ideas on how to build trust again. At first, the meetings were tense, emotions ran high, but slowly something began to shift. People started listening, not just to each other but to themselves. Outside the town, Maria's story continued to gain attention. News anchors talked about it on morning shows. Social media users shared messages of support. A well-known civil, Rights leader reached out and invited her to speak at a national event focused on police reform and racial justice. Maria thought long and hard before accepting. She wasn't looking for fame or attention, but if her voice could help make real change, then she couldn't say no. When she stood up on the big stage, surrounded by hundreds of people, she took a deep breath and smiled. She remembered the scared woman who had sat in her car with a gun pointed at her chest. That woman had been afraid, yes, but she had also been strong. And now here she was, speaking not just for herself, but for so many others who had been treated unfairly. "I didn't ask for this moment," she began, "but I won't waste it." The crowd listened closely as she told her story. She didn't blame everyone in uniform. She knew there were good officers trying to do the right thing. But she also spoke honestly about the fear so many Black Americans feel when they see flashing lights behind them. "I want my students to grow up in a world where they don't have to worry about being hurt just because of how they look," she said. "I want every parent to feel safe sending their kids outside to play. And I want our police officers to protect all of us, not just some of us." Her words touched hearts across the country. After the speech, reporters wanted to interview her. Activists reached out to thank her, but Maria stayed grounded. She kept teaching, kept volunteering, and kept showing up for her town. Back home, the pressure on Officer Jenkins grew. The internal investigation found clear evidence of misconduct. His past records were reviewed, and several complaints from other drivers surfaced, some dating back years. It turned out he had been warned before for being too aggressive, but nothing serious had ever been done. Now the consequences were real. Jenkins was officially fired from the department. He was also charged with criminal offenses related to pulling a weapon on an unarmed citizen based on bias. The courtroom hearings were difficult to sit through, but Maria stayed strong. She answered every question with honesty and grace, and when the final decision came down, it was clear. The court agreed that Jenkins had abused his power. He lost his badge for good and faced jail time. It wasn't revenge Maria wanted. It was justice. And finally, she saw it happen, but she also knew that firing one officer wouldn't fix everything. There was still work to be done. That's when Maria decided to start something bigger. Along with a few trusted friends and leaders in the community, she helped launch a new program called Bridge Builders. Its goal was simple: bring together police officers and young people from different backgrounds to talk, learn, and understand each other better. The first event was held at the local high school, Maria's school. Officers came in plain clothes and sat with students in small groups. They talked about fears, hopes, and what safety really meant to each person. Some conversations were hard, others were surprising. One officer admitted he had grown up scared of teenagers because of stories he'd heard. A student shared how nervous he got whenever he saw a patrol car. But by the end of the night, something beautiful happened. People left feeling just a little more connected. Word of the Bridge Builders program spread fast. Other towns asked Maria to share how they could start similar programs. Schools reached out wanting to use her curriculum on communication and respect. Even some colleges invited her to speak about leadership and courage. Through it all, Maria stayed humble. She never forgot who she was: a teacher, a wife, a daughter, and a believer in kindness. One afternoon, while walking through the halls of the school, a young girl ran up to her and hugged her leg. "Miss Thompson," the girl said, eyes wide, "my daddy said you're brave like a superhero." Maria laughed softly and crouched down to meet her student's eyes. "I'm not a superhero," she said. "I'm just someone who believes in doing the right thing, even when it's hard." The girl nodded like she understood perfectly. Later, that day, Maria met with David at the sheriff's office. They sat in his small office, sipping coffee and watching the sun set outside the window. "You know," she said quietly, "this isn't the life I imagined for us." David smiled. "No, it's not. But I'm proud of you every single day." They both knew the journey wasn't over. Change didn't come overnight. But they also knew they were building something stronger together. One honest conversation, one brave act, and one hopeful step at a time. Because Maria Thompson had learned something powerful during this whole experience. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand tall when the world tries to knock you down. And sometimes the loudest way to speak is by telling your truth with love. Time passed, but Maria's story didn't fade away. It stayed with people, like a quiet flame that kept burning long after the wind had died down. In her town, things slowly began to change. The sheriff's office became more open about how they trained officers. They added new rules about how to treat people during traffic stops. They even invited Maria to help design part of the training program for new recruits. She didn't do it for power or revenge. She did it because she believed in second chances and in giving everyone a chance to learn from mistakes. One day, a young officer came up to her after a meeting. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure what to say. "I just wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "I'm new here, and I've been learning a lot from what you went through. You're making this place better." Maria smiled gently. "That's all I ever wanted." Outside of town, Maria's name started showing up in school textbooks and online lessons. Teachers used her story to talk about courage, justice, and the power of speaking up. Students read about her in class and wrote reports on how one moment can change a whole community. A few years later, she got a letter from a girl who had once sat in her classroom. The girl was now in college, studying law. "Miss Thompson," the letter read, "You taught me that standing up for what's right doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means staying calm, telling your truth, and not letting fear stop you. Because of you, I want to help make our system fairer for everyone." Maria read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in a box where she kept special memories. Not because she wanted to remember herself, but because she wanted to remember why she kept going. The Bridge Builders program grew stronger each year. More schools joined. More officers took part. Young people started leading parts of the talks, sharing their own stories and helping others feel less alone. At one event, Maria watched proudly as a group of students led a circle discussion. One boy, about 15, spoke with confidence. "Used to be scared of cops," he admitted, "but then I met some who really care, and now I know not to judge everyone by what happened to someone else." Across the room, an older officer nodded and said, "Same here. I used to think I knew everything. Now I know I still have a lot to learn." Moments like that reminded Maria why she kept doing this work. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. But it was real. Back at school, her students still called her Miss Thompson. Some were now grown up, working jobs or raising families of their own. Others were still sitting in her classroom, learning history, math, and life lessons. She never stopped teaching them kindness. Never stopped reminding them that their voices mattered. Never stopped believing that even small actions could lead to big changes. David stayed sheriff for several more years. Under his leadership, the department earned new respect, not just from the town, but from other cities looking to improve their own systems. He always made sure to credit Maria. "She showed us what courage looks like," he would say in speeches, "and she gave us the push we needed to become better." When David finally retired, the town held a big celebration. Officers, teachers, parents, and kids came to thank him. But when they asked Maria to speak, the crowd gave her a standing ovation. She stood at the microphone, hands steady, voice soft but strong. "This town has always had good people," she said. "Sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we need to be reminded. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that healing starts with listening, and change starts with caring." Everyone clapped. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Years passed. The world kept moving. New challenges came. But so did new hope. Maria never stopped speaking up. She traveled to other towns, sharing what she had learned. She helped start youth programs focused on leadership and respect. She even wrote a book, not about being a victim, but about finding strength in hard moments. One evening, while walking through the town park, she saw a group of teenagers sitting on a bench, talking and laughing. She smiled, thinking back to the kids she used to teach. She remembered the ones who had been afraid, the ones who had struggled, the ones who had doubted themselves. And now, watching these young people live their lives, she felt peace, because she knew something deep inside. Her story hadn't ended with pain. It had grown into purpose. It had turned into hope, and most importantly, it had become a light for others to follow. Maria Thompson had started as a teacher, but she had become something more. She had become a voice for those who still needed to find theirs. And even though she never asked for it, she carried that role with grace, love, and quiet strength until the very end.